This is Sports Jam. I'm Doug Doyle. There's a new documentary coming out that tells the whole story about Yankee great Yogi Berra.
The 2015 All-Star Game features the four greatest living baseball players: Hank Aaron, Johnny Bench, Sandy Koufax, and Willie Mays, who are all absolutely amazing players in their own right. But I'm in the room sitting next to my grandfather, Yogi Berra, and I'm thinking, wait a second. He's got more MVPs than any of these guys. He's won more World Series rings than all four of them combined. And I look at him and I said, "Are you dead?" And he said, "Not yet."
It ain't over. An intimate and revealing portrait of a largely misunderstood American icon. This emotional and engaging documentary about New York Yankees great Yogi Berra takes us beyond the caricatures and Yogiisms and into the heart of a sports legend whose unparalleled accomplishments on the baseball diamond were often overshadowed by his off-the-field persona. And joining us today on Sports Jam to talk about the film is the director, Sean Mullin. Great to have you on the show, Sean.
Oh, great to be here. Thanks for having us.
And also joining us is the executive producer of the documentary, Yogi's wonderful granddaughter. She's been on Sports Jam before. Journalist Lindsay Berra returns to Sports Jam. Always a pleasure to talk to you, Lindsay.
Always happy to visit.
It Ain't Over opens in theaters in New York and LA May 12th. Lawrence Peter Yogi Berra is one of baseball's beloved all-time greats. He amassed 10 World Series rings, 3 AL MVP awards, an incredible 18 All-Star Game appearances. He caught the only perfect game in World Series history in 1956, Don Larson's gem. And those of us who have had a chance to talk to him or visit his beautiful museum on the campus of Montclair State University know how special Yogi really was. Sean, you have said the stories you're most interested in pursuing as a filmmaker are driven by the inherent conflict between perception and reality. And Yogi's story certainly fits that. Take us to that thought process and the goals that you have for this documentary.
Yeah, no, I believe that for a long time. Again, the projects I've tended to get involved with typically deal with either characters or institutions that have some sort of disconnect between the perception and the reality. And so when it came to Yogi Berra, when I was first approached, I was approached by Peter and Mike Sobolov, two of the producers on the film. They had a connection to the Berra family through the golf charity event and stuff. And they had produced an earlier film of mine, and they when they asked me to direct this, I initially thought, well, Yogi Berra, he seems too perfect. Like, what's the movie? What's the drama? What's this movie going to be about? But I started digging a little deeper, and I immediately found out he was just criminally overlooked at every stage in his life, from childhood all the way through to his final days. And so I thought that was a really good in for the story. This idea that society kind of refused to view him as anything other than a caricature, but really he was just an incredible ball player, and even more impressive than that, he was an incredible human being.
One of the greatest World Series resumes of any player ever.
Hey, he got it done. He was a winner because he had all the rings to prove it.
He's a figure that was larger than life.
There's no Jackie without the acceptance of Yogi Berra.
When Yogi comes to the team, they say he doesn't look like a Yankee.
He wasn't 6'3" with blonde hair. Everything about him was kind of funny.
He was a character. He was made fun of in the New York press.
But that sort of became who Yogi Berra was, this funny little guy.
That's right. Yogi Berra.
I don't think Yogi liked it too much.
And what's really fun and special about this documentary, first-person accounts include, of course, Lindsay, Yogi's 3 sons, Tim, Larry, and Dale, former Yankee greats like, of course, the captain, Derek Jeter, Joe Torre, Mariano Rivera, Willie Randolph, Don Mattingly, Tony Kubek, and Ron Guidry, and also featured our fans and broadcasters, fans like Billy Crystal, Bob Costas, and Vin Scully, the late Vin Scully, and plus photos and eye-opening archival footage on and off the field. And Lindsay, you probably already know, because you kind of know me pretty well already, and that I'm an emotional guy. You probably already know what touched me the most about It Ain't Over. And that was you reading your Grandpa Yogi's love letters to your Grandma Carmen. Simply beautiful. It tells a great deal about the man behind the mask at home plate.
I get teary every time I read those love letters. So it makes me happy that they're hitting everybody else in that same emotional way. But it was so important to us to include that love story between my Grammy Carmen and my Grandpa Yogi. They were married for 65 years, and he was a wonderful husband to her. She an amazing wife to him. But he's just a tremendous family man, father to my dad and uncles, and grandfather to the 11 of us that got to call him Grandpa. And it was really important to us as we were making the movie to show that side of Grandpa as just, a normal, loving, kind, compassionate human being. But I also always say that really the guy that we got at home was the same guy that you all saw on the baseball field and on television. There weren't two versions of Grandpa. He was the same with everybody.
When Forrest Gump, he had all kinds of connections to all things, but Yogi Berra was not a character like Forrest Gump. He was the real person who was connected in so many ways to so many major events in U.S. history. The Purple Heart, U.S. Navy, World War II, a D-Day veteran. Inducted into the National Baseball Hall of Fame in 1972 in Cooperstown. Presidential Medal of Freedom in 2015 by President Barack Obama. United States postage stamp in 2021. Of all of those, Lindsay, what matters to you most?
Oh, man, I have to pick one thing, huh? I think Grandpa was really proud of his service to his country. But I don't know what matters to me is that people remember Grandpa for how good he was on the baseball field. But at the end of the day, as good as he was as a baseball player, he was a better human being. And he lived this incredibly rich, incredibly full life as a first-generation Italian immigrant who volunteered to serve his country during the D-Day invasion, and was lucky enough to come home when so many other men did not come home from World War II. And I think that just gave him this incredible perspective. And, we talked today about practicing gratitude. I don't think Grandpa had to practice gratitude. I think he was every day eternally grateful for the fact that he came home from the war when other people didn't, and got this chance to be a grown man playing a kid's game for a living for the rest of his life, and got a chance to get married and have kids and live this wonderful life. And I want people, like I said, to remember the greatness of his baseball career, but also understand that he would have been an incredible human being if he had never set foot on a baseball field.
I don't think it's just a coincidence that prior to his filmmaking career, Sean Mullin served in the military. He was stationed in Germany as an Army officer and finished up his time as a captain in the New York Army National Guard, where he was a first responder on September 11th, 2001. Sean, you hold an MFA from Columbia University and a BS from the United States Military Academy at West Point. I'm sure that D-Day invasion was something special to you as well.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, when I was breaking out, how do you take someone whose life is so incredible over 90 years and compress into 90 minutes? There's no easy way to do it. But I made certain that I wanted to make a meal out of that whole scene, that whole, I wanted to really get in there. And we really searched. My editor on this film, by the way, Julian Robinson, is just the best editor I've ever known, and a truly an incredible filmmaker. And digging through archival, if you see the film, I mean, there's so much wonderful archival throughout the whole film. And he really oversaw all that. But no, making that scene, really giving that that whole sequence of him going off to he had a Yankee contract in hand, and he put it on hold to go serve his country, and he volunteered for a secret mission. He didn't know what it was. He thought it had something to do with Buck Rogers, because it was the rocket boats. Typical Yogi move there, and it ends up being the invasion of Normandy on D-Day, and he took it in stride. But those were some of the hardest, darkest days of his life, and I wanted to make sure that people knew that. And yes, I've my own background too. I've had some hard, dark days, being down at Ground Zero and having to cordon off the area and do some things down there that weren't necessarily pleasant. And so I know how, the dark days, make the brighter days that much brighter,
You don't have to make anything up when it's the story of Yogi and Sean Mullin. That's what's right. It's not dramatized. It's real life, and that's what's so fun about it. Lindsay, your dad and your two uncles are part of this doc, and they all have different experiences with Yogi. And I would imagine for Dale, your uncle, it may be harder to watch this than the rest of the family because of his drug issues in the past when he was in Major League Baseball. What are your thoughts on your two uncles and your dad as you look at their appearance in this documentary?
I mean, for me, it really just solidifies like what a great dad my grandpa Yogi was. And he was a great grandfather to me. But as we all know, relationships between grandparents and grandchildren are very different than the relationships between fathers and mothers and sons and daughters. There's usually a lot more animosity between fathers and sons and whatnot. But, Uncle Dale really gives Grandpa Yogi credit for saving his life. Uncle Dale knows, where he came from, and he's incredibly proud of where he is right now, almost 3 decades sober. And he knows that he very well might not have made it if Grandpa Yogi hadn't put his foot down and really pulled him out from a really, really dark place. And I guess you could say it might be difficult for Dale to watch, but I also think that he's really proud of how far he's come since those times. And, he knows what he might have given up, as a baseball player. He was arguably one of the best shortstops in the National League for a couple of years, and he could have done a lot more in baseball, and he messed up. But without Grandpa, he might have messed up even more. So I think it's a nice story about what families can do for each other and how important the family is and the love of a father for his son. And I think that's something that resonates with everyone.
As executive producer, what did you want to make sure that Sean had to have in this film?
I started rattling off lists of people who were over the age of 90. We got to call this guy now. Vin Scully was my number one priority for Sean because he was not a young man in 2019 when we started doing this. And Vin had been the Dodgers announcer for my grandfather's entire career. So there were few people alive who'd seen Grandpa play more baseball games than Vin Scully. And that was really important to me. And then Grandpa's roommate, Dr. Bobby Brown, he was his roommate with the Newark Bears in 1946. They broke into the big leagues together. Bobby also was not a young man. I wanted to get as many of Grandpa's teammates as possible. So Tony Kubek, Bobby Richardson, Hector Lopez, many folks had already passed away. So we were fortunate to get those people in the time that we did. Ralph Terry, several of the guys that are in the film now have since passed away. So we're very lucky to get them when we did. I just wanted as many people who could talk about Grandpa's impact on the Yankees as possible, who could talk about how he was able to elevate other players and how important he was to that Yankees dynasty.
Sean, isn't it amazing that Yogi has his hands in everything when it comes to big moments in baseball? You talk about Jackie Robinson and the big play at home plate. Was he safe or out? Yogi's a huge part of that as well. He just can't avoid, the World Series 1956, Don Larson's game. He's got the Jackie Robinson moment. He's got all the World Series. Behind me, you see the 1961 World Series champions. His connection to the Yankees and the Mets, though, as a manager and coach is significant too. And his controversial firing by George Steinbrenner. You can feel the hurt from Yogi when you look at the clips in the documentary. This started in 2019. And I would imagine as you were going through this, Sean, you felt it too. You felt that disappointment that Yogi went through until we had a nice ending to how that all worked out.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, no, it's one of the big moments in the film. We try not to give too much away when we talk about this stuff. So it's always tricky for me as the filmmaker because we want to get people into theaters. May 12th, by the way, is when it opens. To plug it one more time. But yeah, it's there's a really great 3-act structure to Yogi's life. We were able to kind of craft, a lot of people, when you're again putting these documentaries together, you have so much to draw from, and how do you put everything together in a way that's going to grip an audience with a hook at the beginning, and then kind of second act tension escalating into a third act catharsis. Everything goes back to Aristotle, right? Crisis, catharsis. And so we kind of set this up with the first act crisis and the third act catharsis. So the crisis being kind of he'd been forgotten, and the catharsis being he'll never be forgotten. So you start as a filmmaker and as a screenwriter and director, you start at the top level, and that's where we started. So yeah, there is a really nice catharsis that comes out at the end, and then, but even that still isn't enough. When he died, the AP, the official Associated Press headline said on the day that Yogi died, it said Yogi Berra has died. So they were still comparing him to a cartoon character even on his death. So we really did our best to really see if we can rectify that, and hopefully it ain't over, really.
The Yogi-isms. Let's talk about the Yogi-isms.
He said nobody goes to that restaurant anymore. It's too crowded.
When you get to a fork in the road, take it. What?
And it ain't over till it's over.
It makes a lot of sense.
That personality of his actually served to take away from his legacy as a baseball player.
It always felt wrong. It's not fair to him.
He's just a gentle, kind soul.
He was loved by so many people in this country.
Total respect for Yogi, a guy that everybody loved, not because he was cute and funny, it's because he was good and he was real.
He was the most overlooked superstar in the history of baseball.
Lindsay, I've mentioned this to you before when we talked at the museum. He was a small man, strong, right? Very strong. But in size, you look at Aaron Judge, right? And you look, if he would stand next to Yogi today, it would be like he'd double him in size, if not more. I caught many years, right? And you talk about in the film, Sean, about how catchers control the game. But Lindsay, when you look at Grandpa Yogi, I can't imagine how he did it, how he was able to be so successful in really a frame that doesn't suit him that much, maybe as a catcher, but not so much for baseball.
When he was playing, he was 5'8" and 192-ish pounds. And by the time I came on the scene, he had definitely shrunk a bit. He called me Shorty my whole life. But by the time I was about 14, I was probably taller than he was, but he continued to call me Shorty. But if you really looked at him, his calves were like bowling balls. And he had these like meat hook, gigantic hands. And he was thick, and his quads and his butt and his chest, everything was just thick about Grandpa. And I will say, when I was like in my mid-20s, Grandpa was a boxer in the Navy, and I went up to the house to watch a fight, and he was like giving me little slips and jabs, and I was doing it too. And I walked into a little rabbit punch that didn't mean to be a rabbit punch. We were messing around, and he bruised my kidney, and I peed blood for a week. So at age 80 or so, or 78, however old he was still strong as an ox. And I will also say, Aaron Judge and Giancarlo Stanton, those guys are a foot taller and probably 100 pounds heavier than Grandpa was. And they're swinging like 33-inch, 31-ounce bats now. And Grandpa at 5'8", 192 is able to handle a 34-inch, 35-ounce bat and put the barrel on the ball no matter where it was in the strike zone and drive it out of the ballpark. So the package may have been a little bit misleading.
Sean, for me, Yogi was always something special, because my dad was a catcher too, and he would point out, who would be the great players. So it never really escaped me how great he was. But when you look at what he's accomplished, and the fact that comedian, actor, and Yankees fan Billy Crystal summed it up very nicely, Yogi was a giant. He was the most overlooked superstar in the history of baseball. What conversations do you want viewers to have as they walk out of the theater?
Oh, goodness. Well, I mean, I think the first and foremost is, again, this was a man who lived just an incredible life and lived it with no filter. Everything he said, he did immediately. There was no, there was nothing, no pretense, nothing. He just lived a life that is really enviable in so many ways. So I think that's one of the first things. I think from the baseball side of thing, the thing that I've tried to get across is, a lot of times when we talk about Yankee, legacy, they talk about, Ruth, Gehrig, DiMaggio, Mantle, right? They kind of gloss over Berra. And so I want him to secure his kind of rightful place in that chain. But even more so, I don't know if there's been a player in the history of baseball who has been so influential in so many key eras and in so many key players. And this is a man, Yogi Berra is a man who met Babe Ruth, right before Babe passed, so just met Babe, was mentored by DiMaggio, played alongside Mantle all those years, ended up coaching, during those the Bronx Zoo years, with Guidry and Jackson and that whole crew, and then obviously managed Mantle, and then mentored Jeter and A-Rod and all those guys. So I mean, who else has that span of influence in the history of baseball? I don't think anyone.
Lindsay, how would Yogi be? Would he be a big social media guy today if he's still I mean, he would certainly, people would be talking about him and people would want him to still endorse products like he did all those years. But would he be able to keep up on social media?
I don't think Grandpa would have a social media, but we probably could find someone to follow him around and just tweet everything he says, and it would probably be one of the most popular accounts, at least on baseball Twitter. Grandpa was around for a little bit of the whole social media situation. He knew that when we were trying to get him the Presidential Medal of Freedom, that a lot of what we were doing was a social media campaign, and I would kind of show him, and I think he abstractly understood that people were reading this stuff, but I don't think he understood that it was being read online. I'm not sure how he would do with it, but I'm sure that with that giant personality of his, it would find its way onto social media no matter what.
And you have to watch It Ain't Over to find out how that all worked out, that campaign, and what it meant to the family and meant to Yogi. That's also a special part of It Ain't Over. It Ain't Over that opens in theaters in New York and LA May 12th. I must say, Sean, I think it was the best ending of a doc that I have ever seen. Who came up with the idea of the ending? I'm not going to say exactly what it is, but who came up with that idea?
Well, I mean, since you said it was the best you've ever seen, I guess I'm going to have to take credit for that. But no, it was my team. I mean, I don't know. I mean, did the very end? Are you talking about like the last ending?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean,
it's beautiful. I think it's beautiful how everyone got a chance to, reiterate.
Yeah,
I won't say what. But
yeah. No, well, thank you so much. No, I mean, I as the writer and director, I definitely had a lot of creative input on the film. So I'm glad, and I appreciate you liking it. But no, Lindsay put in so much. Again, Julian Robinson, my editor, Mike Connors is my co-producer, who's my creative producer, who's my right-hand man and everything. And of course, Matt Miller and Natalie Metzger over at Vanishing Angle are just two of the best independent film producers in the business. And so really, I mean, everybody chimed in at every level. And of course, the Sobolovs, who started this whole boulder up the hill, which we're about ready to shove off here soon. So it was really a team effort.
So Lindsay knows I like to ask these type of questions. Yogi appears to you in person today. Now, after doing and putting all this time into the documentary, what's the one question you want to ask this baseball great?
The one question I want to ask, how's he like the film? I mean, what else would I ask?
So, Lindsay, you get to have one more day with Grandpa and Grandma Carmen. Where are you taking them and why?
I don't think I'm taking them anywhere. I'm just going to sit around the island in their kitchen and eat whatever Grammy's cooking and chat with Grandpa about the Yankee game or the Seinfeld episode he just watched, or talk to Grammy about growing up on the farm in Missouri. My grandparents were such cool people, and I was very privileged to have them until I was 36 and 38 years old. A lot of kids don't get the opportunity to have their grandparents for that long. And they were my friends, beyond being Grammy and Grandpa. These were people who knew every little intricacy of my life from the moment I was born until they died. And just to be able to have another couple minutes with them sitting at the table, just talking about nothing, would be absolutely amazing.
Now, if you get the opportunity on May 12th, you know where you got to head. You got to head to the theaters, and you want to see It Ain't Over in New York, in LA, May 12th, the great story of Yogi Berra and all different aspects of Yogi. And you might think you know everything. You don't until you see the film. And there's so much more that I'm sure was left on the cutting floor But great work, Sean, and congratulations on this documentary.
Oh, well, thank you so much. I'm really glad you enjoyed it. And then thanks for helping us spread the word.
And Lindsay, they're going to have to listen to your other episode of Sports Jam to hear the story about what kind of liquid that Grandpa Yogi liked in his cereal. Because it's one of the best stories that you ever want to have. And it just shows you the sweetness of Carmen and the sweetness of Yogi, and what a love story they had. To me, that's what really touched me the most about this man. He was a hero in so many ways.
He really was. I miss him. You're going to make me cry, Doug.
Thanks again on being a part of this Sports Jam. Appreciate it.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Really appreciate it.
Sports Jam is a WBGO Studios production. You can check out all the past shows by going to wbgo.org/sportsjam or wbgo.org/studios. You can also find Sports Jam with Doug Doyle on the NPR list of podcasts or wherever you hear podcasts. A special thanks going out to Ray Stallone and Sony Pictures Classic for allowing me to check out a screening of It Ain't Over in New York City. Until our next Sports Jam session, I'll see you at the game.